Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? It's still July 4th. This is the second video I'm making about that All for One Regime Diabolique session I ran last night, which was great. Dance with the Devil. I already made an epilogue video tying up some loose ends, but I want to talk about the session some more. So this isn't really like a recap video. Maybe I'll do a recap video at some point. But some of the thoughts I had about the session, there were some parts I thought went well and some parts that didn't go well. There were some I don't know if you've had this experience as a game master where as things are happening, you're kind of got that other voice in your head, kind of making commentary. And some parts where you think might not be going as well as you thought, or things that might be dragging, or you wonder about it afterwards. And so I spent some time today wondering about the session. I had some misgivings going in, or some things I thought, I wasn't sure how they were going to go. And so I want to talk about that, really briefly. Using my Game Master cheat sheet, I want to make a different video about that, just using those sheets in general. It went fairly well. I didn't use it as much as I thought I might. Here it is. It's pretty much the entire party on there, all 4 characters, including mine and all 4 lackeys. Font was really small. There's just a lot. Problem is there's a lot of skills and whatnot, so I'm trying to make these single columns and everything. And so I realized, I'm too old to have a font that size. But I was able to reference some of the abilities of the players, or the player characters, which was really helpful because I didn't need to ask them, and a lot of times there was no need to roll dice. One of the things that stood out to me, it was something I already knew, was my inexperience or weak point as a one-shot game master. I'm just not very good at that. That's not my forte. It's not something I did a lot. I'm more of a campaign guy. That's kind of how I grew up. That's kind of the games I sort of gravitated to, and so I'm not as good. I think I even talked about this in a video already. It's like Sebastian is unbelievable at doing the one shot and keeping us right within this little time frame. And a lot of the other guys are too. A lot of the other people are too. It's just not something I'm as good at. So I kind of went with this misgiving already, and I wasn't quite sure. Did I prepare enough? I was thinking, okay, we're going to talk 2.5, 3 hours. That would probably be what I imagine the session would be. Trying it to be almost 4. But at one point, going into it, I wasn't sure. Was this going to be an hour and a half or an hour, or is it going to be way too long? We have to cut it at the end. Let's see what else happened. I did this little experiment where I gave everybody kind of like this little script or idea. We had this little dance segment where each one of them played a non-player character, and that was kind of inspired by what Francois did in his session, just having us off the cuff play somebody, and also some talks that Anthony and I have had about more troop style play. So I gave that a shot, and there were some parts that went really well with that, and some parts that did not go really well. And what I realized, I kind of wrote out these. The problem is, Anthony got this really easy job. I gave him this really brief thumbnail sketch of here's who this person is, here's the basic idea of what they're going to do, wing it. And what I should have done for the other 2 guys, for Francois and for Sebastian, is to do the same thing. And initially, when I came up with these concepts of these interactions with these non-player characters, I kind of had this idea in my head of what I was going to do as a game master, how that character was going to act, and I kind of wrote it down that way. And I should have taken some more time and to pare it down to here's an idea. Unfortunately, I gave Sebastian this big script, which I told him before the game. You don't have to follow this. This is the basic plan. But I should have given him. What I should have given was Louise de Lafayette asks Martin to dance and says she's been having crazy dreams about Joan of Arc, and she's not sure if she still wants to become a nun or whether she should take up a sword and fight agents of the devil. Is she just nuts? I need your guidance, Martin. You're a man of God. And just go with that and let him wing it. But I really liked how they handled the roleplay of the non-player characters. I like the idea of players in a game, whether it's a multiple GM game or not, having to take on, or being allowed to take on the role of recurrent NPCs. I really think that's kind of entertaining. And the NPCs, for the most part, for Sebastian and Francois, that they play, they're ones that they introduced. Francois invented this one, a young woman, the nun with the monster hunter nun, who was probably just going to be a character that never appeared again, but I figured they were very compelling, so I wanted to bring her back. And also Louise de la Fayette, Sebastian did not invent that historical figure, but he introduced that character. And I knew going in there, there was big risk of me stepping on the turf of another co-game master, due to the nature of this game where we have several different game masters, because it's a character that Sebastian introduced. And so I had misgivings, and I almost changed it, and I said, no, I'm going to go with this. But I should have just had him wing it. But one thing we haven't done, as co-game masters in this game, is we haven't had enough time to really discuss, because there's been no the contract, so to speak, as we've talked about this since this session, was that we all, each one of us run a session, and so we're not like committed to a campaign. I'd like to do it, but I understand that we're not all. That hasn't been like a discussion. But we haven't done enough to like share kind of like hands-off warnings to each other about non-player characters, or just collaborate more about like who they are. We do have a OneNote document, but there's sections of it that are private, or there's sections of it that are more just information. Like here's the character, but like we haven't talked about some of our intentions for characters, non-player characters, and some of this is just kind of like I don't want to say we don't trust each other, because I believe we do, but just kind of trusting the whole environment to kind of lift the veil off our intentions or who these characters are, because this does. I've talked about this before. This removes some of the surprise element. That's one of my misgivings about getting involved in a co-GM game, was that you don't get to surprise each other as much. You don't kind of have your cards held close to your vest, where people just never quite find some of that out. But I've had interesting conversations with Anthony about that, and very recently, one of the past few days, where we're talking about ideas for his character and connections with like possible mentors and allies and patrons in his magical journey, because due to the nature of magic in All for One, you need all the help you can get. He's kind of doing it on his own, so and he's got this big, rich, possible family history. And it's funny because the two of us came up with the exact same two ideas for connections, and it was really kind of fun, because we kind of trust each other enough to talk about this. As like I was talking to him as a possible game master bringing this up, and he's talking about me as the player, and so it's different than the kind of like this classic sense of game mastering, at least for me, where I would have kind of hidden this information to be revealed in play. It's more of a collaborative thing, not in a GNS like narrative way. Well, mostly not, but it's different. So it's one of those things we just haven't done enough. So what ended up happening is I ran the risk of kind of stepping on toes, and I think I stepped on Sebastian's toes a little bit. And I knew that was a possibility. That here's this character that he probably wants to have a recurring character, and I throw this curveball. But I think I would have solved a lot of that by kind of having giving him this a real brief snapshot, like here's this idea. She's been having crazy dreams. Go talk to Martin, instead of more of this kind of script that I originally had. So you live and learn. You make some mistakes, but I think that's how I would handle that from now on. I actually like that technique quite a bit. I just realized afterwards that I need to, when I do that, personally, I need to keep that to just a basic idea. Here you go. Here's an idea. Ad-lib the heck out of this and take it wherever you want to go. I realized that I should have awarded style more during the game for roleplay, especially when the characters were just acting like themselves. Jean-Marie was acting completely out of his element. He was acting moody. He was acting abrasive. He's not a party goer. He was completely out of his element during most of the session. I knew this was going to happen. That was not, this is a kind of world that Briscoe kind of fit right into. But the other guys, not so much. And Briscoe had more at stake in this particular session than the other guys did in terms of connections to other human beings. And I knew that going in. And so I think I was in more of in a mindset. I've got this sign up here. Let's see if I got that sign that I kind of hid. As far as like, remember to do initiative, let them narrate, and remember to hand out style. I literally had this hanging like over this computer, and I had this other. Let's see if I can do this without making too much. I had this other table with all this stuff, including the diet root beer, the style points over there. I even had the sheet. Let's see if you can see with the Jean-Marie and Briscoe. Like there's different color style chip. I got their names, so I knew where these people were going to be. Or how much style points they had. In case I needed to know that for this particular reason. Like I wasn't giving them enough, or they weren't spending enough. Here I am off camera and whatnot. And anyhow, so let's get back to that. So I think what happened was I got in this mindset of giving style for role-playing during like cinematic musketeer moves, or like really over the top actions for their character. Like when their character said something particularly funny, or really what they would have done, I gave them style. But I could have handed out a lot more style for especially for Jean-Marie and for Martin, acting like themselves in a more subtle way. So I realized that that's something I would need to work on a little bit more, because there should be this back and forth flow of style points, and it doesn't always have to be cinematic and musketeer, in my opinion. Another fun thing I noticed, because it wasn't this, not all bad. This is just kind of this critique back and forth of things I thought of, and I'm probably missing a bunch. But Jacques, I got a chance to actually role play my lackey, which I normally do not have a chance to do that. And when we started the game, I was not aware of that in the rules. The canon of All for One rules is if you have a lackey, some other player creates them. You don't create your own lackey, which we just created our own lackeys, but. I get a chance to role play him, and when he was relatively sober in the beginning of the scene, I role played the character as I imagined him, much more socially adept, much more, coherent and together and with it, despite the fact that he's a wino. Once he became drunk, I played the character that Sebastian created in the first session and reintroduced the third, and I really kind of just started channeling that other Jacques, the Jacques in his cups, and that was a lot of fun to kind of go from one to the other. And so I don't think I would have played him the same way had Sebastian not already kind of set the tone for him being that way. So it was neat to be able to play the other character because I really like Jacques and I don't never get a chance to play him. So what was my intention for this session? Because it was different, and I kind of ribbed these guys an awful lot and kept on saying, well, it's going to be an OSR dungeon crawl. Are you afraid we're going to be, you're going to be hunting monsters in the catacombs underneath Paris? And of course, then I get, Paris Gothique, and there are catacombs, underneath Paris. And I think Anthony just mentioned that some kids just got lost in those in real life a little while ago. I was looking for my Paris Gothique, but anyhow. Back to the show here. So my real intention for the game was is I wanted for the session to have kind of a darker tone. I've been loving the sessions we're having, but I wanted a little bit less of the kind of Scooby-Doo, what monster do the Musketeers defeat this week thing, that's been going on. Which, I mean, it's cool. We're doing one-shots, and it's not exactly like that. I'm kind of like, I'm making a caricature of what's been going on. But I wanted to have a darker tone, and I wanted, a mixture of the entertaining role play that I've come to love from this group, which pretty much just happens. Like, I spent a lot of the session consciously just kind of sitting back and letting them talk. Like, even the beginning cafe scene, I didn't really want to interrupt until they kind of, gave me a space, and then I was sure they were giving me a space because I just enjoy how those guys kind of bantered amongst each other through a lot of it. I mean, there was a lot of the game. I think my favorite part of the game was really before the action started, just the role play of these characters being them. That's the part of the game that I've grown to enjoy the most in this particular group. But I wanted to have a combination of that and what was essentially kind of a dark and confusing and disturbing vibe. And sometimes the players were confused and they weren't quite sure. And that was kind of my intention, to kind of give it that sort of that tension. Like, I was like, well, where is this person? What's really going on? I don't understand. I wanted to give it that kind of like, it wasn't quite an investigation game, but sort of. There was a mystery. There weren't a lot of obvious clues, like, just not sure what the heck's going on. It's funny, I never considered it to be an OSR flavored game, but, Sebastian made some points today. And he said, well, it started in a tavern. And he goes, well, it was a cafe, but yeah, it was a public place where you could sit, eat, and drink. And then the party was approached and given an adventure hook. And he said that I'm walking around during my lunch hour at work listening to this, thing he'd made for us, private little conversation, and I'm laughing because I'm like, yeah, I guess I pretty much started it in a tavern. So that was kind of funny when I realized just how OSR the session really was in some ways, complete with a dungeon crawl at the end. It wasn't just a dungeon crawl; they went underground and were in like 3 rooms, but still, it was the first time the Musketeers have been underground. So I guess leave it to the OSR guy to do that. And another part of my intention, as I thought about the session, because originally it was going to involve a vampire, kind of maybe a recurrence of the vampire in Strasbourg, and I decided no, I want to do something a little bit different. But part of my intention was to put somebody in danger and at risk that the Musketeers had some kind of connection with already, and something that wasn't a stranger. So Francine was literally an NPC that Francois invented by mistake, as Briscoe was, confusing. In the very first session, with Henri, the captain of the Cardinals Guards, or the ensign of the Cardinals Guards, wife, Josephine, and he would say, like, was it, her name is Josephine, or maybe Francine. I'm thinking, well, probably has a twin sister, and that's why he's confused. So he kind of half invented that character. But it's somebody that, like, instantly has this connection with Josephine, who was a very real character, a real person for Briscourt, being one of his lovers, and which instantly has a connection with Henri, who has a huge connection with the Musketeers. So Francine became a real person with real connections, to me anyway, that instantly impacted the Musketeers. So it wasn't just this random stranger. It was somebody that, there was going to be real consequences. And so my other intention for the session was I wanted it to be full of contingencies and real consequences. So if you haven't watched the session, I may be spoiling things for you a little bit, but there's always this big risk that Francine might die, or that she might disappear and not be found ever, or that she might disappear and die during childbirth, and then maybe be found, maybe never be found. But this wasn't just a woman dying, like like we failed to save the day, but there'd be consequences in terms of like how it would affect their main rival in the Cardinals Guards, and which has kind of happened now. That said, there was also this big possibility and big risk in a way that the Musketeers might save her, save the day, and suddenly Henri, their biggest rival, might be in their debt. That would be a consequence the other way. So I wanted to be one of those kind of things where it was going to have an impact later on. So it was, once again, I'm not the best one-shot game master, so I was thinking, like, what are the effects of this? What are the ripple effects are going to be of this particular session? And also contingency-wise, if they saved her, there would be this potential for her to die during childbirth, and to go insane as a result of this childbirth, or perhaps even for an exorcism. Well, I'll get to that, but there were, I had all these contingencies and possibilities kind of figured out already, because I knew that there were various ways that things could go once the action started, so to speak. And the end of the game kind of slowed down, and part of it I think was just due to I'm still a little clunky with the combat. Although I think the combat went okay. It was a very big, complicated scene in the ballroom, which kind of slowed it down. Which I knew I wasn't expecting it to happen there. So that was a little bit of swinging it. I wasn't sure if I needed to call it and leave a cliffhanger at one point, but I realized that the contingencies that kind of been tripped, it wasn't the ideal cliffhanger. So I'm not sure if I made the right decision, but we kind of pressed on. And I think at some point it kind of slowed down because all of us weren't sure whether we were going to call it or not. But anyhow, I could see the other thing I could see, and I could see while it was happening too, that people might start to get the impression that I was giving this kind of no-win, I forget the Star Trek thing, Gabiashimaro, whatever the heck it is, like a railroad scenario, like no matter what you do, rocks fall, everybody dies, and that wasn't the case. But the players pretty much had tripped several contingencies that forced the antagonist, Julien, to take drastic action, which I'd planned for, that he would have done that. It would have been rather extreme circumstances. And sometimes I kept hesitating, like whether the actions they were taking would have had a chance or possibly resulted in the ability for them to arrest this chain of events once they really kind of tripped all these contingencies. And maybe I should have had them roll somewhere for a chance, like for maybe even like a cinematic moment. Maybe I should have had them stop for a second, saying, is there any ability you could use here, something that you have done to maybe stop this as this chase scene happened. So the last part of this long video, apparently it's going to be long, I want to look a little bit further behind the veil in terms of what the contingencies were, what the players didn't do, what the players did, some of the things I expected, didn't expect. And so once again, a little bit more spoilers, even for the players here, without giving away too much, because there's some things I'm not giving away. If they guess some stuff, that's great. What the players didn't do. This is like a big, giant opportunity, which I probably would have missed as a player too. But here was something that it was a contingency I planned for. They had the opportunity of over a day to investigate who this Julien Lebeau was, and which they just didn't take. And I looked, I had the sheet here. I took a look at them and their characters, and with the investigation skills that some of these characters had and some of their lackeys had, they could have very easily found out lots about this character and where he lived. Wouldn't have been hard at all. I kind of came up with difficulties for that. And he was just high profile enough that they could have easily located this guy, and he wasn't that far away. The game included a contingency of them visiting his chateau, which is where Francine was until the ball. So she was there, and he was not. And his servants there were loyal, but given the empathy, the con, the intimidate skills of the party, good chance, not to mention fencing and all the fisticuffs they get involved in, there was a very real possibility that they could have rescued her before the ball ever even happened, and events would have gone very differently. They could have arrived at this ball if they chose to go. The game could have ended really fast. They could have arrived at the ball and having already kind of altered events significantly, and that would have been a very interesting scene. One of the things that happened that was unexpected was that Jean-Marie decided to go visit the estate of Godelieve-Lussier and try to get himself on the security force, which I thought was very novel, very cool, and I felt really bad because, you know, I thought about it and I pretty much shut Jean-Marie, I shut Sebastian down in his attempt to do this because, you know, from a simulationist perspective, you know, based on who this woman is, she had a really loyal and built-in security force, and it would have been insane if I was in a position to like accept some guy off the street as an extra security guy. You know, it's a cool idea, but it didn't make any sense for them to take in a stranger the day before. So it was a rule of cool, but you know, I had to deny it for the sake of verisimilitude. And of course, Godelieve recognized Jean-Marie, which is something I had to think about for a second. But you know, based upon her talents, the talents of her manservant, which are not things I'm going to go into, but they had some abilities, or you know, high skilled areas, and also from a social perspective, in that, you know, Godelieve knew who started this trend of you know, inviting musketeers, like who was the guy that had this mystery duel, you know, who his friends were, who his close associates were. She invited them specifically, so she knew who the guy was. So something I had to think about for 1 second. But based on all their talents put together, you know, good chance the manservant said, "Hey, one of those guys is at the door pretending to be a gardener who wants a job, you know, holding a sword tonight or tomorrow night." So, but that was really cool and interesting. You know, I felt bad about shutting down the rule of cool, but I just had to go with the verisimilitude. So then what? What were some of these contingencies? I don't think I'm going to go over all of them, but you know, if the musketeers, now once again, really, you know, in my mind, what would happen is they're going to meet Julien for the first time if they don't go to his, if they don't do anything to stop it. You know, if they never go to and rescue Francine from his residence, if they never bump into him somehow, like by really ardently pursuing him, which would have taken a lot of doing, and the chances of success are probably about 0. But there's reasons why. If they didn't do, once he made this grand entrance in the ball, the contingency was already in place, or the tripwire was already in place, where she was going to trip, her mask was going to fall, her sister was going to be at the ball, even though she told the musketeers go there, she wanted to go and see what was happening herself. Didn't tell them she had an invite, but she sees her sister, she screams, there's this whole cacophony starts. That's when, like, you know, it hits the fan, so to speak. So I knew this was going to happen. Now it was going to be the action part of the session. Had nothing else happened, there was going to be any action. If they didn't notice that Julien was taking her upstairs, because it's possible they wouldn't have, based on everything else that's going on, if they didn't react immediately to stop Julien from taking Francine upstairs, then the house guards would have never entered the scene. The only reason that these other guys are around the house, you know, kind of intervened, and they had another mook battle, or mini mook battle, was because they instantly convened, you know, upon Julien, who was an important person to them. And there was a very big possibility that they wouldn't have noticed in time, based on anything else that was going on. If they got upstairs, you know, and Julien and Francine and his manservant Henri got upstairs, and the musketeers didn't subsequently investigate, and for whatever reason decided, you know, maybe they didn't notice that she went upstairs, Francine would have stayed in the house. She would have given birth, and she had set chances to die in childbirth or go insane. And I had pretty much some willpower rolls or some body rolls she needed to make for those cases, based on the nature of her child and her condition. If they chose to react and investigate after a time, like say maybe that, you know, Francine and Julien got upstairs, and then they said, "Hey, wait a minute, evil is afoot," and ran upstairs. At that point, you know, the door would have been locked anyway. He would, you know, try to, you know, make a bit of an escape, but just he would have stayed in the bedroom. But at that point, Julien would have made an escape attempt from that large dumbwaiter, you know, past the kitchen, into the cellar, into the catacombs underneath there, that kind of connect parts of France. So that was already kind of built-in contingency that was going to happen. And they, you know, they would have heard the dumbwaiter, they made put 2 and 2 together and figured out what was going on. Should they have blocked the stairs more effectively? You know, or if things looked more dire from Julien's perspective, you know, as he decided to make this ascent up the stairs with Francine, he would have gone right to the kitchen. and probably may try to block the door going the dumb way or that way, lock the door there. So there was that other contingency, and the Musketeers definitely had opportunities to figure out how to get around the other side, all that whatnot. The adjoining servants' room was a great idea by Anthony when he realized how big the door was to the master bedroom, and I went with it, and I realized, hey, of course there'd be an adjoining servants' room. Of course that's what would happen, and so he was able to bash through the other door. Given ubiquity rounds, I'm not sure if I made a mistake here or not. This is one of those things where I was kind of second guessing myself in terms of the pacing of this chase. I saw Julien as effectively one step ahead of Anthony, at least, of the Musketeers this time. And they weren't giving a coordinated effort at that point. Anthony's kind of chasing him. Francois is doing one thing. Jean-Marie is doing something else. The chase isn't quite going on as a coordinated effort, and so they had opportunities to maybe realize head them off at the pass, or there were possibilities that they didn't quite get. There was one moment that everything rested on one die roll. Had Anthony been able to successfully attack Julien, which he just rolled lousy, that would Julien would never have closed the door. They probably would have killed him, and they probably would have saved Francine right there. That was kind of like that, do or die, that was the Hail Mary pass. It wasn't even a Hail Mary pass. I can't. He shouldn't have missed it. That's what it boils down to. But that's what happened there. But yeah, I always saw him as one step ahead, and I'm not sure if I made a mistake there, whether I should have given him some more chances to maybe leapfrog over him. But nobody really narrated anything really cool either. So just wasn't sure. But at that point, I went with my gut feeling that he's one step ahead, based on the way ubiquity rounds work, and just kind of based on my experience as a game master. Now, I wasn't vested in that he escapes. I was just thinking, well, this is kind of what's happening right now. The adjoining, let's see, it would have been different if they'd been able to head him off. Let's see, what else did I write down here? The oddly loyal riffraff in that catacomb adjoining the cellar, the wine cellar, they were already there. I'm not going to give you the reasons why they were there, but there were some people that were loyal to Godelieve Lissier, and perhaps by default to Julien Laveau, that were there, that were going to be, in my mind, the most likely chase scene was at some point, if they hadn't stopped him already, he was going to get down there. This riffraff was going to be called in to assist. It was going to be pretty much a mook battle. They would have taken him out without a problem. And the most likely scenario I planned for was the fact that they was going to have this brief encounter, and then that the manservant Henri was going to turn and face the party, and pretty much fight the party or block them, and allow his master Julien to make an escape with Francine. And he's not going to go into his stats, but he's obviously a very capable guy. They killed him quite handily, and I tell you what, the augmentation that magic gives Martin is pretty amazing. But he was, and I saw the way that working really wasn't that I was going to TPK them, because he could have. Pretty impressive stats, but more that he was going to incapacitate them. So that was kind of my other contingencies, because it wasn't, he may or may not have killed them, but it was more like the intention was let his master escape. And I figured that if Julien got that far, with Henri, blocking the passage, with the mooks already there, that, and he's had Francine with him, the chances of the Musketeers catching him was low. And that was his plan. He wasn't a stupid man. It wasn't his first rodeo. It was not like he was unaware of that tunnel. He had escape plans built in should anything ever go awry. And his idea is to emerge in the streets, not so far from there, get a carriage, use a safe spot, temporary hiding spot. This is kind of his area of France, or at least his friend's area of France. He knows what's around here, and he knows where these catacombs lead, and just kind of wait the Musketeers out with Francine. The last-ditch contingency, like if everything went wrong and things looked really dire, was for Julien to kill Francine, do a botched, hurried cesarean section, and take the child that he wanted so badly for some reason. And he would only do this if he felt he had no other option. And unfortunately, he really felt like he had no other option. Like it was very, very important for him to have that child, and Francine was just, a vehicle, and so she was expendable. Not what he wanted to do, but it's something he did in the dumbwaiter on the way down, because he knew he wanted to get out, and he didn't have a lot of opportunities. He knew he had the mooks waiting for him to help him out. His manservant, he had no idea what was going on at that point. Had Francine been saved by the Musketeers at any point, an exorcism might have removed the threat of her child from her, and that's something they would have had to kind of figure out. And based on the nature of how fast she got pregnant, any discussions they might have been able to have with her, they might have kind of surmised that might have been a good idea, given the nature of Jean-Marie and Martin. They might have thought of those things. If she had given birth, whether or not Julien was alive, there were still set chances for her to die in childbirth or go insane, given the nature of her child. And then there was this awkward matter of what to do with the child, for lack of a better word, no matter how many of its parents were alive, dead, or bonkers. So yeah, it's kind of a look behind the veil in terms of some of the contingencies I had there. So I felt bad because at some point I knew it kind of looked like a rocks fall, everybody dies, this guy's getting away no matter what you do, and that wasn't the case. It was just there were some contingencies. The bad guys want to win, and to quote Matthew Colville, and they're going to stack things. They're playing on his turf, so to speak. And he had all the cookies, he held all the cards. They're playing catch up, and so I knew, from a simulationist, realistic perspective, if I was the bad guys, what I would have done, and I'd stack the deck in my favor. So that's what he did. So it wasn't so much that they had no chance; it was that it was going to be a bit daunting, and unfortunately, did not go the way they wanted to. And there's going to be some consequences that way, but. So yeah, there were some things I learned from the session. I'm not unhappy with it. There's things I would have done differently. There's things I still want to reconsider, like should I have done things a little bit differently here? But it's a learning experience. It ended up with one of those dark tones that I thought it might, which I kind of wanted, not by forcing a particular end, but by just forcing the idea of this, despite the fact that there's a lot of great bantering and great role play between these characters, which I really, really like. There's this other really kind of dark vibe going on in their section of France, or in Paris in particular, and just things are grim, things are gritty, things are it's a dark time for France, it's a dark time for Paris, and they're in the epicenter of the devil's control of Europe and perhaps the entire world, based on some of the conceits of the game. So. It's not all roses and swashbuckling. They're just a real dark tone. So I wanted to explore that a little bit. So that's my rather long insight on a rather long game, and talk later.